Thank you for staying with us, and we'll continue our conversation. But let me bring this in here. Justice for All says at Mutumbiyu Gasol local government area of Taraba State, immigration personnel demand for 500 naira in lieu of identity cards that are done at their immigration checkpoint for those coming into the country. That's from Mutumbiyu Gasol local government area, and that's Justice for All tweeting there. Enzo says every human life is sacred from conception to natural death. The right to life is the first and foremost fundamental principle of human rights. It is so unfortunate that Nigerians have sacrificed humanity or human life on the altar of religion and tribalism. All right, thank you so much. And now let's move on to this matter of multiple SIM ownership. In an updated SIM card registration policy, the federal government has limited subscribers to 3 cards. Now, this means none of the people living in the country can have more than 3 SIM cards registered to their names. As part of the new measure, the government has ordered the Nigeria Communications Commission to make sure that the national identity number now becomes the prerequisite for future card registration. All cards already registered should be updated with their own owner's name before December the 1st, 2020. Foreigners will now have to use their valid passports, traveler's passports, to register SIM cards. The registration process is now to be handled by fully accredited agents. No pre-registered SIM cards would be sold, and no unregistered SIM cards would enter the mobile networks. Well, the eventual registration is to be led by operators themselves, NCC. Well, this is the directive from the federal government to the Nigeria Communications Commission. But this matter of multiple SIM ownership, where did it originate? How does it work? There are those when you're having a conversation with some people. I see some people having like 4 or 5 lines, 4 or 5 phones. And then now there are certain phones in the country that can take 4 SIM cards. So, so you find someone with one phone that has like 4 SIM cards, and they begin to, come on, how can you register 4 SIMs? Anyway, it's not me. It's just the questions I ask. And well, fortunately for us, we have people here to help us answer some of these questions. So here in the studio, we have Chief Adeolu Ogunbanjo, President of the National Association of Telecom Subscribers. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's been a
It's a
while.
pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. And we will be having a guest from the Abuja studio. I don't know if he's here. There he is. Mr. Tony Ojoba is a former Director of Public Affairs, Nigeria Communications Commission, but he is in the studio as a private citizen, not as a representative of the NCC. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Ojoba.
Yeah, thank you, Nata. Thank you.
And just before we begin that conversation, I need to say here that we did reach out to the NCC to come in their official capacity. And from what we heard, they are still working on that directive from the federal government to look at the number of SIMs owned by individuals and the registration process. They're still discussing that and working out the modalities to ensure that it is streamlined so that everyone is happy at the end of the day. But they will come in due course to talk about this matter and other issues as regards the telephony. So let's have this conversation right now. Mr. Gubajo, so how many SIM cards do you have?
I used to have 4.
Sorry, I couldn't help that.
Yeah, basically because I need to actually monitor whatever the operators are doing.
Okay.
You know, that's why I had 1 for each of the networks.
So you had the 4 SIMs because of your responsibility?
Precisely.
Okay, but how did it work out for you?
Well, you know, sometimes you now put it, usually I used to have 4 phones, but right now just 2 phones. So, but then it's cumbersome sometimes when this one is ringing and all that. So for me, aside from actually ensuring that I do monitor the operators, I don't think I need more than 3
I mean,
SIMs.
I've been in situations where I meet someone and the person has like 4 or 5 phones, and then maybe he's on the call and the other one's ringing, and then he's speaking, hey, hold on, hello, and while he's still managing that one, another one's ringing, so he's speaking of hello. You know, at the end of the day, as you said, it's cumbersome. But Mr. Jobo, is it really worth it having multiple SIM cards?
No, it's not. The number portability that was introduced by the NCC, the regulator, really has address that problem. I've been using one particular network for the past 15 years. And the reason is because there seems to be some kind of improvement maybe across networks. So really, it's not necessary for one to really have multiple SIMs. If, for instance, you're not happy with your network, you can port into a network, still retaining your number because that number is identified with you. So it's better that you have your number that you can port from one network to the other. So I think having multiple SIM registrations really is not necessary any longer.
So what was from your findings, because I do know that you're into the ICT, I mean, since you left ICT, so you're into IT and all of that. What are the reasons you hear people give about having the multiple SIMs? What are the reasons you got?
Well, I think initially when the networks rolled out services, you didn't have pervasive network across the country. So you had certain networks working better in some locations. So individuals, probably if you are living in Lagos and maybe you are traveling to Uyo or to Enugu, now maybe there was a particular service provider that had better services in that location. So what people did was they registered different numbers depending on locations they probably usually travel to. But of course, all of that has really changed. There's some kind of improvement. The networks are pervasive now. You have networks rolled out across the federation. So really, wherever you go with a particular service provider that you're utilizing, you should be able to have access to services. So I think it's a kind of legacy issue, a historical issue where individuals at the onset, when the services started in 2001, 2002, the rollout wasn't as fast as it should be. So in some locations, you had some networks really providing better services. But I think now, all the networks have provided services across the nation. So really, if you are not satisfied with your service provider, then you can port to a network that provides the kind of service that you want. So really, there is no need for people to have multiple SIMs anymore. But that is actually what caused the initial multiplication of SIMs, people having different services on different networks, so that
I like the choice of word.
The phones wherever they are.
I like the choice of word you use, that initial desire to have multiple SIMs, because recently
That's right.
I had to rethink using only one SIM card because I traveled somewhere and I couldn't, first of all, there was no network whatsoever. Then I traveled to another place. There is network to make calls, but I can't use my data. I have a friend who has one network and all that she does with that, she uses that one for data and the other one she uses for phone calls. So again, this matter still comes into play. Well, let me bring it to Mr. Gumbanjo. Mr. Gumbanjo, in monitoring the operators, the subscribers also, whom you get to meet quite often, they have this issue. Yes, there's some level of improvement in some areas, but the matter is still there. There are people still having multiple SIMs. What is the solution?
Well, let me just tell you that some of the subscribers, since this portability, yes, is there, but this 3 SIM being limited to, per subscriber. Some of them, for instance, I went to town yesterday when I was called to come. Now, why? And I said, why would you want more than 3 SIM? And I said, look, what if I have a company? Now, I want some for my personal self. So it means that out of the 3, it means I now have to, devote either 1 or 2 to the company.
Business.
What if I, for instance, now have 3, 4 companies? How do I do it? Well, I said, can't you repeat the same number? He said that would be, some of them, kept looking at the business aside from I mean, being individuals, you know, who subscribe to a particular network. Yes, you asked, you did say, you were asking a question.
Now, I was saying, is it worth it?
Well,
So at the end of the day, you have 3 companies, you have 4 companies, so you have 1 SIM per company.
well, yes. So it means that one per company. I will now have to, what about the one, you know,
The personal one.
the personal one? So I need to have, so he's justifying the fact that he probably can do 5. I said, you may not need that, you know, and you probably would just, you know, any of those 3, you just attach to that particular business. But by and large, it's a good, you know, regulation. And for me, it will curb a lot of things. People who just register SIM, you know, just use it for 1 or 2 things and then throw it away. Some of them, you know, particularly through some of these agents that are neither here nor there, and they fix one face with another name, all sorts of things is happening.
So that tells you something that maybe that the NCC is not doing its bit as regards proper registration of SIM card owners,
No, NCC had given
not
the...
supervising effectively.
No, it is the operators actually that should be called to question about this. But again, yes, if all this is happening, NCC should actually wield the big stick and, you know, on whichever offending operator. But the point I'm trying to make is you do not need more than 3 SIMs, you know, as an individual, either for your business or as an individual.
Mr. Jabo, that you were with the NCC in terms of regulating what the operators do and how they supervise this SIM card registration. The Identity Management Commission had an issue as regards the data that was captured, because at that time the operators were maybe using only this, and what is needed is that and that. Maybe that has started, but at that time that's the situation. Do you think the SIM registrations at that time were effectively done? If that was so, why are we now having to look for how to capture data again? How come those data is not handed over like Mr. Naji had to say this morning?
Just like you said, Nyota, you know, I can't speak for the NCC now. Initially, when the registration started, there were some challenges, especially with the data capture and also biometrics, which I think had to do with the temperature. The equipment that the service providers brought in at that time had challenges with the temperature in this region, this part of the world. So it had implications for the registration. You had situations where you notice then you probably try to capture biometrics and they will wipe your finger and then they ask you to put your finger again on the equipment to capture it. Now, all of that was because of issues of heat and sweat and all of that. So the finger marks were not being really recognized very well by the equipment. But I think the NCC at that time did direct the operators to ensure that the quality of machine they were bringing in for this capture was scaled up in terms of its ability to capture data, and then also take cognizance of the region in terms of the heat and temperature. So that I think that happened. But initially, you know, there were those challenges. Some of the equipment were not functioning well and none of that. But the commission came out with a directive to service providers to ensure that the quality of machines they were bringing in will actually give the kind of result that was expected. However, I believe that that has We have actually crossed that line now, and the registration now is faster. Pictures are clearer right now because I believe the quality of machines have improved tremendously. And so the information, the data that is being received by NCC at the back end are much better now than it was at the time that initially the commission started the registration. Now, but of course, there is ongoing scrubbing going on at the regulators and the back end to make sure that the data that is captured has integrity and is the kind of data that can be used. And there is this handshake between the NCC and NIMSI, who actually is charged with responsibility of managing data in the country. So I believe it's an ongoing process. Improvement, will continue. You will recall that this SIM registration started in March 2011. So 9 years down the line, lessons have been learned, and I think that improvement will continue with regards to the issue of SIM registration.
Do you think that virtual SIMs will make any difference? Shizo says he believes that it should actually be 2 SIMs, 1 SIM per individual, and then a virtual SIM of any network, which can be used for data, as the case may be. Do you think that should be it instead of 3 SIMs per person? Would the matter of SIMs being used for crime and all of that be taken care of with that?
I think that policy envisaged the kind of concern that Adeolu was raising. Maybe an organization probably that has an office that may need maybe 3 numbers, as the case may be, or an individual that probably would want to have 3 networks. For instance, people have choices, especially, for instance, in the area of data. Some individuals believe that one network probably provides better services than the other. So they have to get a SIM of that particular network, maybe because of data services, and then maybe another network. So I think the policy is kind of generous in terms of giving an elbow room for individuals to be able to make choices in terms of either voice call or data services. So I think that's fine. It's also important for us to understand that these numbers are national resource, and they are paid for. The numbers are not owned by the individuals. The numbers are owned by the nation. Individuals are just using those numbers because within the period of time they are utilizing that service. But numbers can be recovered under certain circumstances. So people have to understand that the reason also why government is trying to come up with this issue of limiting the number of SIMs is to also conserve this resource, because the numbers any nation has is a resource to that nation, and numbers can be exhausted. So it's important for us to understand that numbers have to be used in such a way that resources are also allocated in a way that numbers are preserved even for future generations.
Okay, we're going to take a moment, but just before we do that, HOB Bangbadi says you can have as many as 4 SIM cards in as much as you officially register the SIM cards, respectively. It says up till date, 1 or 2 of the network providers still provide erratic services. There's one whose data will never move a file in an hour. MC Okafor says, please, I have 6 SIM cards. 4 of them are for calls from different service providers and 2 others for my Wi-Fi from 2 different service providers. All these are due to erratic services. When we come back from this break, Mr. Gumbanjo would talk to us how they've been engaging with the operators as regards these erratic services, because that is what's encouraging, from what they've said there, that's what's encouraging this multiple SIM ownership. But we're back in a moment. Please stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. We're discussing multiple SIM ownership and that directive, which will soon be implemented, that it should be limited to 3 SIMs per person. There are suggestions. Shizo suggested that 2 SIMs will be fine. He says 1 should be a regular SIM and the other should be a virtual SIM. used for data, and then the regular SIM for calls and data as well. But there are those who are concerned about what will be their fate. MC Okafor says he has 6 SIM cards, and 4 are for calls from different service providers, then 2 for Wi-Fi from different service providers, again, because of erratic services. Anthony Adigba says, my take is that it's unfair to restrict ownership of SIM. What is the use of NIN in the registration of SIM? There is poor data management in Nigeria, not the number of SIM. Why has government not limited the number of bank accounts to be owned? Well, that's from Anthony Adiba. Now, Mr. Dubanjo, some of the viewers who have spoken to us are saying that they have multiple SIMs because of erratic services. MC has 6, 4 for calls from different service providers, 2 for data from different service providers, simply because of erratic services. How often have you been engaging with these service providers, and what has been the result? What are they saying as regards improvement of service?
Well, the service providers are, well, from time to time updating their, equipments on the various base stations. Then again, the infracos, the infrastructure service providers, are also encouraging, the network providers to ensure that they improve, on, equipments that will make data fast and all that. But again, the same SIM can also be used for both data and calls. Mr. Okafor did say that he was using a different one. If he wants a dedicated one, maybe just one, he picks. Otherwise, like Dr. Ojobo said, if you know that this is probably getting erratic, port to the particular one that, port that number, if you are limited to 3 now, to the one that, is having
better service?
Better service. So that can be done because mobile number portability has come to stay. But people don't, either because they're not aware or they don't even avail themselves with such services. So 3 SIM, I think, is just fine. The operators should now, ensure that more base stations are done, then more equipments that could, assist subscribers to do whatever they want to do seamlessly and, quickly should be encouraged.
Johanna, Mr. Ojobo, I'd like you to weigh in on this. Johanna says, you can have unlimited number of houses, but only 3 SIM cards, cool? Then Tunde says, are we not looking at the issue of coverage by network providers before limiting the number of SIMs card an individual can own? Can we not define a minimum coverage for networks before limiting the SIM ownership? So Johanna is concerned about people having multiple houses, unlimited number of houses, but now they have to have a limited number of SIMs. And Tunde is concerned about the need for the service providers to even be mandated in terms of coverage. What do you think of these 2 things that are the concerns of these 2 people?
Well, thank you. The issue of having as many SIMs as possible, I just addressed that in my last statement, that you have what they call the numbering plan, number allocation, which actually is the resource. Every nation has numbers. You will observe that networks, for instance, a particular network will start with, say, let me use an example, say MTN 0803. After a while, it goes to 0903, and so on and so forth, then 0814. Now, which means that the first set of numbers are exhausted. These numbers can't be exhausted. They are not inexhaustible. And these numbers are national resource. For instance, the man that is using 6 SIMs at the same time. Now, what is the volume of business on those numbers? What is the level of economics that goes on those numbers? For instance, today, the active subscriber base is about 172.4 million or thereabout. Now, out of this 172.4, in those numbers, you have probably people who have 5 SIMs, 6 SIMs, 8 SIMs, as the case may be. So in terms of planning, you look at that number, and the number has some kind of individuals that have several SIM cards at the same time. But with this policy of restricting it to 3, then you now find out that individuals will now utilize those numbers effectively and more efficiently. I believe that it is a waste of resource for an individual to have about 8 numbers and is only effectively using 2 of them. And that leads to a lot of churn, what you call churn, where certain numbers are idle over a long period of time, and the networks will have to recover those numbers. Now, if there is no economic activity on a particular number for 90 days, that number, the operator has the right to recover that number. What do I mean by economic activity? Either a text message or a voice call. But there has to be an economic activity within 90 days. Now, you have situations where individuals have numbers, they travel, they just come back once in a while, they use it for 2-3 minutes. So the point is this, is about allocation of resources. It's about allocation of, these numbers are national resource, just like the frequency spectrum is a national resource. So these numbers are paid for by the service providers. For every 10,000 number allocated to a network, there's a numbering fee that is paid. So, we need to understand that it is a national resource. It's not something that is inexhaustible. It can be exhausted. And that's why you see from time to time networks write to NCC requesting for additional numbers because the numbers they have been given have been exhausted. So we need to understand that it's about allocation of resources. So if one has 6 SIM cards, what is the level of economic activity on those cards, on those SIMs? That is a point. Then the other question, the other issue that the other man raised, can you remind me of that issue again? What was it that is raised?
But one talked about limiting the number. This
Hello?
standard coverage for service
Yes.
providers. Is there a standard, a level of coverage that a service provider must have, guaranteed?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. In the regulations, of course, every network is expected to provide services and coverage within certain locations. And I believe that as we speak today, I doubt if there's any network that doesn't have national coverage, even up to certain locations and villages. Now, there are some locations that you have challenges because of topography and things like that. That's where the Universal Service Provision Fund comes in. They provide incentives to networks to take services to unserved and underserved areas. Now, those areas are areas that probably do not have return in investment. Because the service provider is also looking at how they can recoup investment. So what the service provision fund does is they kind of provide some incentives, some kind of subsidies for those locations where the networks don't have any incentive, don't have any motivation to go to provide services in those locations. Could be because of topography, could be because of the number of people in that location would not make any economic benefit or sense to the network. So the Universal Service Provision Fund provides some kind of soft landing for those networks by, in some cases, they provide base stations. They provide some equipment in those locations so that they can incentivize the networks to go provide services in those locations. Otherwise, I think that there is a pervasive provision of services nationwide as we speak today.
Still staying with you, some questions coming in here for you. Awolusi Joshua says, using case in point, Dangote, for instance, says, should he be limited to 3 SIMs and each of his businesses and sub-offices per business? Which numbers are they to be using? But I guess that's a question of networking the numbers. Agba Pray says, when you say we should port anytime there's a matter of service provision. He's asking the question, says, how many times are they going to be able to port? That matter of porting really is quite important here, because even the service providers have a limit to the number of days you have to stay within the network before you can move to the next network, and that's based on regulation. But you suggested that if a service provider is not serving you well, you're free to port to another network, and you can port as many times as you want. But what's the time frame, and how quickly does that happen?
Well, the time frame, I think, has been reduced. I don't have the numbers right now, but initially it was 90 days. That when you port, you have to stay 90 days on a particular network. I think there was a review. I don't particularly have the numbers right now. But the thing is this. The reason for that provision was to foster unnecessary porting from one network, what you call shopping. You port from one network to the other, and you port back to the other network. Now, if those restrictions were not put in place, you could see people porting every day. You know, you port today, 2 days, 3 days, you're not satisfied, and you can port to the other network. But it was put in place for some kind of discipline, for some kind of, to allow for planning, and also for people to really allow the networks to provide the services, because porting in itself has implications in terms of accounting, because somebody who might be porting might have some bills outstanding on the other network and things like that. So the number of days given is to allow the network to make sure that there's no outstanding bill, on the previous network where the person was, and then of course that no issues of criminality. For instance, in this new policy that is coming up, one of the things that networks are supposed to do, and also the regulator, is any particular number that has been used for any fraudulent activity or criminal activity has to be blocked completely in that particular network and not to be used. So I believe that provision is to instill some kind of level of discipline and responsibility in terms of the way people move from one network to the other.
Okay, so to encourage responsibility. That's a good one. But Kingsley, I'll bring this to you. Kingsley is concerned about data plans, how you buy data from certain networks that are supposed to, they advertise 1 month, that data is supposed to last for 1 month, and after 2 days, the data is gone. And then you find out that some you even buy the data, but nothing happens. You're not able to browse, you're not able to move files and all of that. So what should they do?
Well, first and foremost, the moment you discover that something has gone wrong with your data, all you need is just to complain to the operator, the network operator, and then they will definitely do 1 or 2 things. And if you are not satisfied with that, then you escalate it to the Nigerian Communications Commission with the toll-free line of 622.
622.
Precisely. The moment that, after reporting to the particular operator that has issues with your data, and then you are not satisfied with their resolution of the issue or your concern, then you now escalate it to the NCC toll-free number 622.
And they will look into it.
Definitely.
I'm afraid we'll have to end this conversation here, Mr. Ojoba and Mr. Ogumbanjo. There are a lot of questions that are pouring in. Lance is concerned about if I have 3 SIMs and then I'm moved from one location to the other, but I have to port. At whose expense, at time and all, at whose expense can I go and do this porting thing? So
porting is free.
It's free, yeah, but again, someone says there's restriction on portability has to be removed for them to be able to port when they need to. But it's also encourage responsibility. But hey, we have to end this conversation here. I'm so sorry for those of you sending your comments in now, but thank you all the same. Mr. Chief Adeolu Ogumbanjo is the president of the National Association of Telecoms Subscribers. Antonio Jobo is former Director of Public Affairs, Nigerian Communications Commission, but he's here in his private capacity as a Nigerian who is into IT and software. But thank you so much. Please, you've heard that if you have any issues whatsoever, having spoken to the service provider, you can use the NCC's toll-free line 622 to lay your complaints about whatever it is that's not going well with you and the lines. But the number, SIM restriction would soon get into force. But NCC will be joining us someday real soon to talk about this matter. We'll be back shortly. Please stay with us.